Welcome to Sasha Responds, where very obviously I respond to questions and comments that were left here in YouTube. Now, these are questions that my producer has actually picked out. So I'm going to take a look at the question for today and just kind of answer off the cuff and give you guys my thoughts. So let's see. This question comes from Lewis Y5P, and it says, "This video is amazing. You've explained my circumstances really well. I have felt ashamed of changing my gender identity from trans-masc to non-binary because people claimed I was lying. This was really validating and informative. Thank you." So, Lewis, I am so glad that you wrote in. Thank you for sharing your comment here. I think this is a very, very common and unfortunate experience that a lot of people have. And I have just kind of a couple of thoughts about this. I think it's a natural tendency. We all have biases to think that we are kind of doing things the right way and maybe others are not. That's not always the case, but that tends to be how people view their own decisions versus the decisions others make. And I've seen that a lot of people who are trans or questioning their identity or have really severe gender dysphoria sometimes think that they are kind of the real deal, for lack of a better word, and that other people don't know what they're doing or are lying or are confused or are faking it, or kind of a whole host of other accusations that I've seen people make. And I think this is really tricky because at the end of the day, in my experience as a therapist, everyone is really genuinely trying to do their best and figure out where they fall on all of these kind of spectrums or identities with the information they have at the time, with their own feelings. And so it's really complicated and unfortunate when there's a tendency to disparage people who are just doing the best with what they've got, right? And another thing that I've noticed, and I wonder if, Lewis, this is something that you've experienced. If you're in an online group, let's say, and you're starting for the first time to question your identity, and you're starting to say, hey, I think I might actually be non-binary, or I think I might be trans. A lot of people in groups that are dedicated to gender and trans and identity and stuff, people will be very congratulatory and they will encourage you and they'll say, oh my gosh, that's, so great that you're figuring out who you really are and you're being authentic and so on and so forth. But when people kind of shift from a trans identity towards either a non-binary identity or even say like, I don't think I'm trans at all, they don't tend to receive a lot of support, and sometimes they're even criticized, or again, like Lewis was saying, sometimes they're accused of having lied or things like that. And that is such a problem. And this is why I made, a couple of videos now talking about how it's not right to say there's no right or wrong way to be trans. And then when people inevitably do question their identity and explore those identities, if they want to get out or change their mind or backtrack or change their identity altogether, it's really unfair to criticize people for doing that. In my experience, people are just absolutely doing the best with the information they have at the time, with their feelings at the time. And so I think we need to give people a lot more grace because it's really challenging. And I think what can be really helpful, if any of you are in a period of questioning or trying to sort things out, is to ask yourself hard and honest questions, right? Like, I think a lot of people may go into groups and read people's comments and try to sort things out by looking at the experiences of others, but it's really good to also ask yourself questions that could be clarifying. Like, if I didn't have this concept of gender identity, how would I describe my feelings? How would I express or understand the difficulties that I'm having? And that can be really helpful because for some people, certainly not all, but I think for some people, they're dealing with kind of ambiguous distress. And if they find themselves starting to question their identity, it can become this almost like cycle, like a Rolodex. You guys may not even know what a Rolodex is, but like a cycle of like, am I this? Am I this? Am I this? And sometimes that's not always the most helpful way to approach things. So all this to say, Lewis, I really hear you, and I'm so glad that the video resonated with you. And for those of you out there, please try to be gracious with one another and understand that everyone is really just trying to figure things out and doing the best with what they have. And so this kind of comparison game that people do is not always helpful, and it can really be destructive in some ways. So anyway, I hope that makes sense. Lewis, thank you so much for writing in, and I will see you all in another Sasha Responds. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure that you like and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to watch more, just click here. This information is meant for educational purposes only and not as a substitute for mental health services.